A racist CEO belittles a black woman, laughs in her face during a flight. Imagine being on a first-class flight and having the person next to you laugh in your face just because of your skin color. That's exactly what happened to Olivia Carter, a successful black woman who endured the disdain of a racist CEO. What he didn't know was that his mockery would cost him everything. Flight 207 from New York to Los Angeles was nearly full when Olivia Carter boarded with her briefcase in hand. She was a poised and elegant black woman, dressed in an impeccable business suit. Her seat was in first class, courtesy of the company where she worked as chief financial officer. As she reached her row, she noticed a man sitting next to her looking at her with a mix of surprise and disdain. He was a white man in his 50s, with silver hair and a designer suit. His watch gleamed under the airplane lights. "Excuse me, I need to get through," Olivia said politely. The man sighed and moved just enough to let her in. As soon as she settled into her seat, he let out a short, arrogant laugh. "Well, this is interesting," he said, loud enough for her to hear. "I never thought they'd let just anyone in a first class." Olivia slowly turned to look at him, her face unreadable. "Excuse me, is there a problem?" "Oh, not at all," he replied, smiling with obvious superiority. "I'm just surprised to see, well, certain types of people here." Olivia held his gaze for a few seconds. She knew exactly what he meant. Her years in the corporate world had taught her to spot racists instantly. They weren't hard to find, especially in positions of power. "My name is Olivia Carter," she finally said. "And you are?" "Richard Wallace," he said with a smug grin, "CEO of Wallace Enterprises." Olivia nodded slowly. She had heard of that company, an empire in the financial world, led by a man known for being ruthless. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Wallace," she said with a professional smile. Richard looked at her mockingly and shook his head. "I doubt it's a pleasure for you. I don't see how you could even understand what we do in my company." Olivia narrowed her eyes slightly. "And what does your company do, Mr. Wallace?" "Something quite complex. Not the kind of thing they teach at, well, wherever it is you studied." Richard's laugh was dry and sarcastic. Olivia felt the heat of anger rise in her chest, but she forced herself to take a deep breath. This wasn't the first time someone like him had tried to belittle her. But what Richard Wallace didn't know was that he was about to receive the shock of his life. Olivia remained neutral as Richard Wallace kept chuckling under his breath, as if he had shared an inside joke. He adjusted his seat, checked his expensive watch, and then glanced at Olivia with a condescending smile. "Let me guess," he said, resting an arm on the armrest between them. "Human resources? Or maybe one of those diversity and inclusion initiatives. You know, those things they try to force real business people like us to accept." Olivia didn't respond immediately. She simply tilted her head and looked at him with patience. "Why do you say that?" she asked calmly. "Oh, come on," he scoffed. "I see it all the time. Companies hiring certain people just to meet quotas. You know, giving them positions that don't really matter to make it seem like they're doing something. But those of us who run real businesses, who truly move the money, we know how the world works." Olivia noticed that a few people nearby had started paying attention to the conversation. She had heard comments like this before, but something about the casual arrogance in Wallace's tone was particularly infuriating. "So, you handle real money," she repeated with a slight smile. "Exactly," he replied, pointing at her with a finger. "And let me tell you something. Nothing in this world is handed out for free. It takes intelligence, connections, vision. It's not enough for the system to try to force certain groups into positions they don't deserve." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "You don't think black women can be in leadership positions on their own merit?" He scoffed. "Oh, sure. I'm not saying it's impossible, but come on, we know how reality works." At that moment, a flight attendant came by offering drinks. Richard ordered whiskey. Olivia, just water. A man sitting a few rows ahead turned at the sound of Olivia's name, and his face lit up. He was in his 40s, dressed in a gray suit, radiating confidence. "Ms. Carter, what a surprise to see you here," he said respectfully. Richard frowned and looked at the man with curiosity. Olivia smiled kindly. "Mr. Davies, what a coincidence." The man, identified as Davies, extended his hand, and Olivia shook it firmly. Richard watched, noticing the deference with which Davies treated Olivia. "I see you've already met our new CEO," Davies continued, turning to Richard with a sharp smile. "Mr. Wallace, let me officially introduce you to your new boss." Richard Wallace's face froze. His smug grin vanished instantly. He blinked several times, processing the words. "What?" he murmured, feeling a chill run down his spine. Davies smiled even wider. "The board decided we needed new leadership at Wallace Enterprises. And Olivia Carter is the perfect person for the job. Starting next week, she'll be making all strategic decisions for the company." Richard was speechless. His face went from disbelief to humiliation in seconds. He had spent the entire flight mocking a woman who, unknowingly, now had the most power over his future. Richard Wallace felt his world crumble in an instant. His arrogance drained from his face as he stared at Olivia Carter, eyes wide. His mind raced to find a way to salvage the situation, but there was no turning back. He had spent the whole flight belittling his new boss without realizing it. "This must be a joke," he murmured, trying to regain composure. "This can't be real." "Oh, it's very real, Mr. Wallace," Olivia responded with a serene smile. "In fact, you'll receive the official confirmation in your email as soon as we land. The board has given me full authority to restructure the company and evaluate the senior executives." Richard's heart pounded. He knew exactly what that meant. "Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot," he said, forcing a nervous laugh. I had no idea who you were." "That was quite obvious," Olivia replied, still calm. Davies, clearly enjoying the moment, checked his watch and sighed. "Interesting, isn't it, Mr. Wallace? One moment you're on top, and the next you realize your future depends on the person you look down on. What an educational lesson." Richard felt a cold sweat forming on his forehead. "Ms. Carter—" "Don't bother," Olivia interrupted, her tone firm but composed. "I'm not a vengeful person, but I am fair. And what you've shown me during this flight makes it clear that your leadership at Wallace Enterprises does not align with our future goals." Richard swallowed hard. "Does that mean that your termination will be effective as of Monday? You will receive your severance package according to your contract, but your time at the company is over." The blow was devastating. Richard felt the air leave his lungs. He looked around, hoping someone would step in, but every passenger who had overheard the conversation was watching him with a mix of satisfaction and amusement. His arrogance had betrayed him. The plane landed, and Olivia calmly stood up, collected her briefcase, and smiled politely. "I wish you success in your next chapter, Mr. Wallace," she said before walking out of the cabin. Richard sat frozen in his seat, pale-faced and trembling. He had just lost everything because of his own ego, and now, the man who had always looked down on others found himself in the very position of those he had so often dismissed.